You ever notice how your brain just won't shut up? You're not trying to think, but suddenly you're planning tomorrow, revisiting that one embarrassing moment from 2014, solving problems that don't exist, and narrating your own life like some weird inner documentary. It's non-stop, like a mental treadmill you never signed up for. And here's the strange part. We don't question it. We've been trained to believe this is normal, that to be alive is to be thinking all the time. But what if it's not? What if you were never supposed to think at all? Sounds extreme, right? But think about it. Do you really control your thoughts? Or do they just show up like spam emails you never subscribed to? And even worse, you believe them, follow them, suffer because of them. But what if thinking isn't the key to awareness, but the thing blocking it? This video isn't about meditating on a mountaintop or escaping reality. It's about seeing reality without thought distorting it. If you've ever felt overwhelmed by your own mind, if silence feels unfamiliar, if peace seems out of reach, then keep watching. Because the truth isn't found in thought. It's found when thought finally stops. And once you see what's underneath it all, you'll never need to figure it out again. 1. The illusion of thought as identity. Most people go their entire lives believing they are their thoughts. Every judgment, every label, every opinion claimed as me. But thoughts are just like birds flying across an open sky. They appear, they vanish, and yet somehow we mistake these birds for the sky itself. This is how identity forms, not as something you are, but as something you think. And thinking is never still. It moves, it spins, it distorts. Imagine you're watching a movie and suddenly forget it's a movie. You start believing you're the character, trapped in the plot, feeling every twist like it's your own life. That's what happens with thought. The mind projects an identity. Your name, your past, your roles, and you believe it without question. But what if you just stopped for a moment and noticed who's watching the movie? This constant identification keeps us spinning. A single critical thought, I'm not good enough, can echo for years, building an entire persona around a lie. One that seeks approval, hides pain, chases success to fill a hollow sense of self. And yet, that identity was built by thought, not truth. That's why so many feel disconnected. They're living as a character they never consciously chose. But here's the strange part. When you stop feeding the story, when you stop believing every thought as truth, something unexpected happens. A quiet space appears, not empty, but aware, still. And in that stillness, the illusion begins to crack. You start to wonder, if I'm not my thoughts, then what am I? And that opens the door to something even deeper. 2. Thinking is not a choice. It's a habit. Most people walk around with the illusion that they're in charge of their thinking, that they sit behind some control panel in their mind, choosing what to think next. But have you ever noticed how thoughts just pop in, uninvited? You're brushing your teeth, and suddenly you're reliving a conversation from 5 years ago. You didn't ask for that. It just appeared. This is because thinking isn't a conscious act. It's a habit, a loop. A background noise that never really turns off. And we confuse this noise with intelligence, with productivity, even with identity. It's like your brain is a radio tuned to the Thought FM station, playing 24/7 without your permission. But you didn't choose the song, you didn't create the lyrics, and yet you keep dancing to the music. Most thoughts are just echoes of what you've been taught, what you've absorbed from parents, school, media, past trauma. It's all secondhand. You may think you're reasoning things out, but in truth you're reacting, responding to scripts you didn't write. That's not thinking, that's automatic playback. Once you see this, you begin to disarm the illusion that you are the thinker. Try this experiment. Sit still for 2 minutes and try not to think. Really try. Not even a single word. Most people can't last more than 5 seconds before the mind throws something at them. Did I feed the dog? Or what was that sound? That alone should reveal something. You're not doing the thinking. Thinking is doing you. And yet we carry this internal dialogue like it's sacred, like it defines who we are. But how can it, if you have no real control over it? This realization doesn't have to feel discouraging. In fact, it's freeing. Because if you're not the one choosing these thoughts, then maybe, just maybe, you don't have to take them so seriously. You don't have to follow every fear, believe every doubt, or fight every opinion that crosses your awareness. And once you stop clinging to the stream of thoughts, a new question starts to arise. What happens when you let the noise fade and just sit in the silence underneath? 3. Constant thought is the root of mental exhaustion. There's a reason so many people feel tired, even when they haven't done anything physical. It's not the body that's worn out, it's the mind. Constant thought is like a faucet that never stops dripping. One drop doesn't seem like much, but over time, it fills the whole sink and floods everything. That's what overthinking does. It drowns out clarity, drains your energy, and leaves you running on empty. You might think you're being productive, planning your day, solving problems, but most of the time it's just repetition, mental static with no signal. Picture someone scrolling endlessly through social media. That's what your mind does when it's left unchecked, scrolls through memories, worries, judgments, fantasies. And here's the thing. Each of those thoughts demands attention, energy, focus. Even just replaying an awkward conversation or imagining worst-case scenarios burns through your emotional battery. It's no wonder anxiety has become the norm. The mind's trying to protect you, but it ends up keeping you in a loop that leads nowhere. You're not solving life. You're just mentally rehearsing your suffering. If you're always in your head, you're not in your life. Think about how often you're with someone physically but not really with them because your mind is somewhere else. You're thinking about the next task, the next conversation, the next problem. Awareness is hijacked by a mind addicted to activity. That's why even rest doesn't feel restful anymore. You lie down, but your brain doesn't. The thinking continues like a background engine you can't shut off. But here's the secret. Rest doesn't come from sleep alone. It comes from stillness. And stillness doesn't mean doing nothing. It means no longer feeding the mental machine. Try just sitting with yourself for 5 minutes a day, not to think, but to watch. No goals, no agenda, just watching. You'll start to feel something strange, a quiet intelligence behind the noise. And once you glimpse that stillness, another question begins to rise. What if silence isn't emptiness, but something far more powerful? 4. Silence is not emptiness. It's your natural state. Most people are terrified of silence, not because it's boring, but because in the absence of noise, they're forced to face themselves. The moment the music stops, the screen turns off, and the mind quiets, something unfamiliar emerges. Space. And space feels threatening to the ego, which thrives on noise. But silence isn't nothing. It's the foundation underneath everything. It's the canvas before the paint. The silence you fear is actually the doorway to your true nature, the place where awareness is not buried beneath thinking, but completely exposed. Think about the last time you sat in complete stillness, not scrolling, not reading, not even meditating with a goal, just being. It's uncomfortable at first. The mind will scream for stimulation, but if you sit through that discomfort, something starts to settle. Your nervous system calms, the inner dialogue slows, and in that space, you begin to sense something steady. Stillness doesn't ask for your attention. It doesn't perform. It simply is. And the more you return to it, the more familiar it becomes, like coming home after a long time away. In that silence, you start to realize how much of your identity is built on noise, on thoughts, reactions, opinions, plans. You feel real when you're thinking, talking, achieving, but that's not the real you. That's the performance, the mask. In silence, you're not performing. There's no one to impress. And what remains is raw awareness, alive, present, and untouched by the mind's commentary. Stillness isn't passive, it's full. It's where insight is born, where truth reveals itself without words. Silence doesn't need to be dramatic. It can be 5 minutes without headphones, a quiet walk without a podcast. Sitting on the couch and simply noticing the room. These tiny moments of stillness begin to dissolve the addiction to mental stimulation. And when that starts to happen, something unexpected takes its place. Awareness that doesn't need thought to know. 5. Awareness exists before thought. Before your first word, your first memory, even your first fear, there was awareness. Quiet, spacious, untouched. It didn't need a name to be what it was. It simply witnessed. That's the part of you that's always been here. Watching thoughts come and go like clouds. You may not have noticed it because you were too busy chasing the clouds, trying to control the weather. But the sky never changed. That's awareness. It doesn't argue. It doesn't analyze. It sees. And it was here long before identity was stitched together by thought. Most people mistake the mind for themselves. They say, "I think, therefore I am," but never ask, who's noticing the thinking? That quiet noticing is the true you, not the voice in your head, but the one hearing the voice. Awareness isn't an experience. It's the space in which all experiences happen. It doesn't need language to understand or beliefs to feel secure. It just is. The more you shift from being the thinker to being the witness, the less personal your thoughts feel. They become like passing cars on a street. You see them, but you don't chase them. And the moment you rest in that seeing, something changes. The pressure to control disappears. You stop identifying with every thought that shows up. "I'm not good enough" becomes just another sentence floating by. Not truth, not you, just a sentence. This is where real peace begins. Not because your mind is suddenly perfect, but because you're no longer trapped inside it. You can observe it without being defined by it. That's the difference between suffering and stillness, identification versus observation. This shift doesn't require effort. In fact, effort only strengthens the illusion that you need to do something to be free. But awareness doesn't need doing. It's already here, right now. As you read these words, notice the space they appear in, not the screen. The awareness behind your eyes. The same awareness that was here yesterday, 10 years ago, and will be here long after the thoughts pass. Thought is temporary. Awareness is constant. Let the mind speak, but don't forget who's listening. 6. Life is happening now, not in your mind. Most people miss their entire lives because they're too busy thinking about them. They're walking through the world physically, but mentally, they're somewhere else, replaying a conversation, imagining a future, worrying about something that hasn't even happened. And while the mind does its dance, life is unfolding in real time, right here, right now. That's the only place life actually exists, not in the story your mind is telling, but in the direct experience of this moment, unfiltered by thought. Look at a child playing. There's no internal commentary, no overthinking, no identity to uphold, just full engagement. That's presence. That's awareness unburdened by the past or future. Now think about how rare that feels as an adult. Most people can't even wash the dishes without turning it into a podcast session, a productivity hack, or a moment to mentally solve their entire life. We're so addicted to distraction that even silence feels like a threat. But what are we running from? Just this moment? The mind always wants to be somewhere else. It promises happiness later, after the job, after the relationship, after everything aligns. But later is a mirage you only ever live in now. When you're truly aware, the present moment stops being a background you ignore. It becomes the whole show. You notice the light coming through the window, the feeling of your breath, the texture of being alive. Noticing doesn't require effort. It requires attention, and attention is the gateway back to reality. Awareness brings you home. Not to some mystical place, but to the simplicity of being here. No need to escape into thought loops, imagined futures, or unresolved pasts. Those places don't exist outside the mind. But this moment does. This moment is the only reality that isn't filtered through memory or fantasy. And once you stop trying to live through thought, you begin to experience life, fully, openly, and with a clarity that thinking can't offer. 7. Thought is a tool, not the truth. The mind is a brilliant servant, but a terrible master. It can solve problems, organize plans, and build entire empires, but leave it unchecked, and it will convince you of lies so deeply that you mistake them for truth. Thought was never meant to lead your life. It was meant to support it. Like a hammer, it's useful for building, but destructive if you swing it at everything. When thought becomes your identity, your lens, your ruler, you lose access to stillness, to clarity, to truth. You can't think your way to peace. Most people try. They analyze, dissect, journal for hours, hoping that one more idea will finally set them free. But thought can't fix what thought created. It's like trying to clean a muddy floor with the same dirty mop. Some problems don't need solutions. They need silence, and that silence is where awareness lives. When you stop assigning so much authority to your thinking, you realize it's not always telling the truth. It's just making noise, educated noise, anxious noise, sometimes even creative noise, but noise nonetheless. Let's say you're driving and a thought pops up. I'm not doing enough with my life. It sounds true, feels urgent, creates anxiety. But if you pause, take a breath, and watch it, you'll see it's just a thought, one of thousands that pass through each day. You don't need to argue with it or believe it. You can just let it pass, like a leaf floating down a stream. That's the shift, from believing every thought to observing it like weather. Sometimes it rains, you don't blame the sky. Using thought wisely means picking it up when needed, then putting it down when not, like writing a to-do list or planning a trip. Helpful, but narrating your worth every 5 minutes, overanalyzing someone's tone, or replaying an old regret, that's not helpful. That's imprisonment. When you use thought as a tool, not as truth, you're no longer at its mercy. You reclaim your freedom, and with that freedom comes a subtle return to presence. A place where peace isn't something to achieve. It's something you stop covering up. 8. The shift into stillness. At some point, you stop chasing answers and start listening to the silence between the questions. That's where stillness lives, not in some far-off spiritual state, but right here, beneath the noise. The shift doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from letting go of the habit of thinking, the addiction to identity, the constant inner narration. And when you finally stop reaching, stop searching, stop resisting, something timeless reveals itself. Stillness isn't something you create. It's something you uncover when the mind finally steps aside. This shift doesn't need drama. It can happen while sipping your coffee, walking to the store, sitting in traffic. One moment you're caught in a thought loop, and the next you're watching. You're no longer in the thought, you're aware of it. That's the beginning of freedom. Stillness isn't about becoming blank. It's full of intelligence, intuition, and peace. The kind of peace that doesn't need reasons, it just is. It holds everything without clinging to anything. That's why it feels like truth. Because it doesn't argue. You'll start to notice that the more you return to this stillness, the less the mind dominates you. Thoughts still come, but they don't carry the same weight. Emotions still rise, but they pass more quickly. Identity still appears, but you don't cling to it like it's all you are. Life keeps moving, but you're no longer dragged behind it. You're aware, stable, grounded in something deeper than thought. And from that stillness, you respond rather than react. You observe rather than absorb. You live, but from presence, not from programming. You're not supposed to think all the time. You're not here to solve life or fix yourself or become some perfect version of who you imagine you should be. You're here to see, to be. And the beauty is, you don't have to add anything to get there. You just have to stop feeding what isn't real. Stillness is already here. Underneath the thinking, the performing, the controlling. It's not a destination, it's a return. And once you taste it, you'll know this is where you were always meant to live from.